Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chooby,
And I'm Vanessa.
and welcome to
No Filters, No Fears
Fears.
podcast.
So, the elephant is a number 5.
Oh, yeah. It's a
So
big elephant.
it's a big topic, and as you know, you've seen our post. It deals with consent,
Yes. And all the different types
and
of consent. Ergo, the did you ask?
yes, did you ask?
Did you ask? Because if you would be so kind, I think a good place to start would be the definition. No?
Yes, literally. So consent literally means permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. And as I told you before, it drives me crazy that it literally means permission and people forget to have manners and to ask.
Right? A lot of assumptions are made. The concept of executive decision gets taken to another level. We make decisions for people without even recognizing it. And that covers all bases, which is another thing that we discuss a lot when we've talked about this topic, which is like it does not just circulate around sexual consent or consent around a sexual act. Consent is everything. It's in the business forum, it's in medical, it's in something as simple as learning your boundaries and your way of communicating with someone and what's acceptable in that, right?
Yeah, it deals with your family, it deals with your friends. It literally deals with your everyday life.
Yeah. When we were talking just before, that I use that example of the guy who asked me about, so there is a new friend I've made, and they asked if how I felt about compliments and if it was all right to give me a compliment. And there could have been multiple reasons for doing so. He doesn't have a partner, whatever the case may be. But the fact that they took the time to ask this, right? Is it all right to give you a compliment? I'd never been asked that. So I didn't necessarily know how to respond. But I was like, I'm really bad at taking compliments to begin with. So being asked for it, I was like, yes, it would be lovely to receive a compliment from somebody who actually asked how I would feel about it. I'm now more prepared, and it made the compliment that much more meaningful. Sometimes it's hard because, for example, like I've told you, I love giving compliments to people that I respect and admire and care about, but I recognize how it could probably be really nice to start asking how they feel about it, or if they're in a space for that. I just found it really interesting.
I think it's interesting too because asking for permission to give a compliment is great because like you just said, if you just start giving random compliments, you don't know what you're triggering for them also,
Yeah.
like, oh, you have nice whatever, and then you don't realize that that person's probably was battling through something to get to how they look, you know
Right.
and it could be hard. I never thought about that though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going to what you're talking about, a friend of mine who's very vocal and very active about eating disorders. One of the things that she discusses a lot is the fact that sometimes we think we're doing a nice thing and saying, "Oh, you look great, keep it up." But to somebody with ED, it it does not translate the same,
Yeah.
right? It might send them heavier into the dysmorphia that they may be battling, or it might trigger the wrong thing. And your intention is the best, but we want to be cognizant of each other. So you're absolutely right, and that you don't know that compliment might be from the best place, and you're not meaning to. But if we start being more aware, it's a fine line though, because then you're like, then entonces no le puedo hablar a nadie. But I don't think that that's the solution either. I think it's just balance, no?
Right. No, you're like, no, you can't talk to anybody. I mean, if that's how you feel, and you have the problem. Like, I get it. Some people just want to talk to everybody, but no, you just, I mean, and it's not even about walking on eggshells about that, but literally permission to do something, permission, it just, that's what consent means. So if you're gonna go out in your daily life to go do something, to do this or to do that, just make sure you're doing it with the right intentions of, asking first.
And that it's not just about you. Be cognizant that you're communicating with a different person that doesn't react or have the same experiences as you.
Claro. So, and yeah, but not everybody thinks that way. Everybody's just me central. Like, oh,
Right.
but
And I don't know, y tampoco siempre es de malicia, de me. You know what I mean? It's,
of
you
course.
genuinely see somebody and you hadn't seen them and they're super dressed up and they look fabulous. You're like, oh my God, you look so good. I think like if it's a person that you know from a long time, like I think I mentioned this to you, like I have a certain relationship with one of my best friends. You know, there are agreements that you make in building a relationship with someone that maybe certain consent, you know, you've already learned those boundaries. But if
Right.
it's a person that you're just coming in acquaintance with, to possibly be more cognizant of what those boundaries may be as you're learning what they can be, like to not cross certain lines. Like, can I tell you? Do you mind if I tell you? Give you a compliment right now. Like that stuck with me forever.
I know, me too. Now that when you said
Now
it,
I'm gonna think about it real hard. I'm gonna give you a compliment. You look so great right now. Like I think I think it's a valid thing to check in because, for example, as a plus size woman, I know that certain compliments sometimes, as good hearted and as like, oh yes, mama. Sometimes I'm like, "Ugh, I'm not feeling so hot about myself, you know, and the compliment doesn't always help. It kind of
right,
puts me back in my own cacas too. So
like it makes you think more about it than not think about it.
yeah. So I mean, it's very valid, but it is one of those lines where like you have to navigate.
When I was looking for consent, ¿cómo se dice eso? Information or consent,
Material.
like on Instagram, on social media, or on the interwebs, I literally only could find consent that equates to sexual assault or rape. Like I did not find anything of the basic human, manners of.
Courtesy, yeah.
Yeah, like nada the family, friends, lovers, co-workers, nothing. And like we said earlier, it goes beyond all of that. It does go to work and to how you're interacting with people. But
Right.
it's mind-boggling to me that it only deals with consent, with
Related to sex.
to relate it to sex.
But we've talked about it before in other episodes where like even the topic of relationships, right? We the correlation automatically for a lot of us is to associate a relationship to being romantic or a sexual relationship. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. The same thing with consent. I think it's the societal conditioning of like that's what's most important or that's what's most prevalent. And it absolutely is important to have sexual
Oh,
consent.
yeah.
Rape is something very real. Sexual assaults are something real. Sexual harassment is something very real that needs to be addressed. But it is not the only kind of consent. And any kind of consent leads to bigger, um, for lack of a better word, aggressions, right? Bigger opportunities for someone to cross boundaries or to cause harm emotionally or physically, right? So I think I think as a collective conscious, we need to start thinking of what that looks like and applying it more because you're absolutely right. It took a lot of sifting to find, you know, the levels of consent or the different types of consent, implicit, explicit, etc., but not associated to sex.
Right.
How organizations adopt consent or how hospitals accept consent. So I think that's where our conversation is going to go, and that's why we're having it, because I absolutely think that it's necessary to talk about consent when it comes to sex, and we're definitely going to touch on that, because I know that there's something very specific that you wanted to touch on, but it's also important to talk about consent in the business sphere, because a lot of us put ourselves in harm's way, and by harm I mean harming your career, harming your possibilities of growth, and getting yourselves into contractual agreements that your ability to make certain decisions or give permission is stripped from you, and you sign to it.
What I just want to make clear is that, yes, it is important for us to talk about consensual, sex, like whatever, agreements, yes, whatever. But at the same time, it's like, the problem that I'm having is that when you ask for permission, some people, they take offense to that. I'm not sure why. Have that ever happened to you? Have you ever experienced that? When you're asking for permission to do the simplest things, like when in families, how we spoke about it before, remember that in family and friendships, there still should be some, just because you're my dad or my mom doesn't automatically mean that you could just treat me however and tell me what to do without asking first.
Right. Yeah, I've experienced that. I feel like, for example, a mí no me molesta, and maybe that's where I need to learn better boundaries. If somebody that has been a part of my life for a while, abre la nevera or whatever, but I still, for me, even having that kind of relationship with some people, todavía me nace preguntar, hey, can I get something? Can I go? May I use the restroom? And they're like, yeah, but I'll just go. And I'm like, I understand that silliness because we've been friends for 15 years. Why would you have to ask me to go to the bathroom? But it's the courtesy, la cortesía that stays embedded in you to just ask.
Right.
But it is true that sometimes people get like really like, I've done this to people. I'm like, why are you even asking me? You know you can. But I feel like it's already been a kind of agreement before, reiterating it every time. Maybe that's why they snap back. I'll say it. I mean, because that's definitely a thing in my family. My tia Ani is really good about, you can come by whenever you want. Let me know when you're coming. Right?
Right.
And people in my family, because my grandmother wasn't like that. My abuela was like, she opened door policy for everyone. No, you didn't have to ask. I guess we all got kind of accustomed to that. And so we no tenemos la costumbre when it comes to our family to call before going. And that is annoying.
I just have.
And then when you have your own space, you start realizing, man, I really wish people would call or like give a heads up. I want to go by before just dropping in.
Ask before you come to my house. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Do not assume that because we are friends or family that automáticamente that gives you the right of
And
passage.
it's not like you don't want them there. It's just the courtesy, right?
Like, okay, so me and my best friend, before we call each other, we ask, may I call you? It does not bother me one bit to ask me. Why? Because you don't know what I'm doing. So for you to just give me a random call out of nowhere, what if I don't feel like talking? What if I don't want to do it and you just called me porque se te salió la gana to call me?
Yeah.
It's you don't know what the person is doing. So why do you assume that it's okay for you to just call them? Asking to call.
And it's not like you're going to be, it's not like you're doing anything shady or anything like that, but everybody's entitled to their privacy,
Right.
and their space. The open door policy is to contact with me, meaning my friend Yesenia is really good about this. And, so is Angie. Like, can I call you? right? Because if it's something beyond the point of texting back and forth or voice notes, can I call you, right? And if the can I call you and we're talking becomes, the conversation is notably something outside of that forum of communication, can we see each other? Can we meet up? Right? But all of that is consent. You're giving the other person the option to, right?
Right.
Because it's not a one-sided thing. It's, the conversation is going to be with someone else. They have the right to say if they're in the space for it or not. We talked about it in the communication episode, right? Where I mentioned that I didn't realize I was taking someone else's consent in an effort to protect them or whatever. I took their consent away. But if it's about coming into your space, your home, in the case of what you're talking about, or even in your mental space, if it's a phone call or whatever, there's still a level of courtesy in asking, hey, can this be a thing? Can we do this? You may not get the best side
Exactly.
of
I
it,
mean,
and it's not even
exactly.
intentional.
Right now, people might think like, oh, they're listening to this and they might think, oh, they might not agree with it or think it's dumb or not understand it fully, and that's perfectly fine. But you don't realize what's not right until you hear it, you know?
Yeah.
Like when you hear it out loud, it sounds different. Like when you live with your family, for example, I think should be, we grew up Hispanic, so yo soy tu mamá and you do as I say. Right. I feel like you should ask your kid, hey, whatever the question is.
I understand what you're saying, and it resonates with me. But I think that comes more into play as the child grows. The older, right?
No, yeah.
The relationship between the parent and the child should develop that, as they're coming into their own and they're learning about themselves, their body, and their way of connecting with other people, right? That, now consent and communication between the parent and the child. Yes. When they're younger, I do understand why there is not a question. It's porque mami dijo. O porque papi dijo.
Yeah.
I understand that mientras vas inculcando, while you're setting those examples and those teachings, I understand why there is less level of consent. And I'm talking about in doing certain things or dressing.
Yeah.
That's an iffy one for me. But when it comes to parents teaching about if somebody tries to touch you and things like that, they're still instilling what consent would look like, right? But in their interpersonal between the parent and the child, I think with age that kind of consensual language changes, because language is what changes. Because I think the
No, yeah,
consent.
of course. That's the thing. I feel like parents should have those talks. I grew up with no talking at all of nothing. I have no
Really?
talks of the touching, the what's right, what's wrong. I didn't. I learned that on my own, the hard way. And I think it's important, it's imperative for
Yeah.
for 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 that to be taught, whether in school, at home, because it all begins at home.
Yeah.
Remember,
Yep.
one of our topics.
On the
And
opposite side of the spectrum, I got the talking to a lot and in depth. My mom's a doctor, and it absolutely is beneficial. Do you think that learning it from someone else was more beneficial than maybe having heard it from your parent? Not from another kid or something like that, but from another adult?
I mean, it would have helped at least to try to come to senses of what was going on or what's going on, or if it is okay, if it's right. I mean, I as a kid or a person, I always had that sixth sense of something's really wrong. I always felt that, and I was like, okay, so I always went based on that feeling. But it would have been nice to have your parents there to be like,
Yeah.
to tell you something. You know, like
Absolutely.
my big sister, she's a blessing to me because she is basically the parent I never had. You know, the talking, you know, and it's been nice to have someone to talk to about certain things growing up, you know, and about what consent is and you know, everything about it. But
Right.
you know, learning it out in the world,
It
I
causes
mean,
those unnecessary things that stick with us for the rest of our life,
right.
or that we
And I
have to learn to work through. Mm.
exactly. I mean, I didn't have those adults either. I didn't grow up with adults like that, you know, ahí conmigo, telling me, you know, this and that. I didn't, you know, but I did have friends, you know, and I appreciate them, and at least I had that, you know. Pero I just feel like when you're home and you have those parents and that are willing to listen to you, go to them. Con la confianza, you know, like you said. And I don't know. I feel like I did have a counselor in college. She became my best friend now, like as an adult. You know that I'm an adult now. You know, and having that at school as well for someone to for you to go to, you know, and be like,
Oh yeah, I feel like counselors at school now have become so like they're not serving. I don't feel like at least the counselors that I had at my school I didn't feel they served a real purpose. But now, from what I'm understanding, counselors have more of an understanding of what support, you know, children need and are looking for that they may not be receiving at home, or because it's better to receive that kind of information. Sometimes information from our peers, especially when we're in the growing stages, is not the best source. Yeah.
not really.
No.
And, but that's the thing that these resources, not every school could provide them,
Yeah.
and that is where you know it's lacking. Where I feel like we should try to get some programs in the schools of minorities. You know, like I feel like the schools. Remember, the kids spend 8 hours of their time at school. I think I don't know how many
It's
hours,
their full time job. Yeah.
and then at home. So that's literally the only two places that kids are going to. Well, and besides their extra, you know, activities at
But even then, that's not. Then you have the parents that are working in the evening. So yeah, I totally agree that there needs to be, um, or just as a parent, like I know, in learning all these things now, it makes me cognizant of certain things that I want to be able to share with my child, or share differently with my child. Because as the world turns, a lot of things remain the same, even from our parents' time, and a lot of things evolve, right? So it's definitely conversations worth having, because that's where we run into these troubles where consent becomes a very one note situation. It's just about the one thing, and it's not, right? Like we've been saying, that it's not just about sex. Every type of consent also has its repercussion, whether actually physically, because it's a a medical kind of consent, but also it has lasting effects on your finances, on your um, you know uh, on how you are viewed in the workplace. So having these conversations from then kind of shapes our understanding of how we ask for consent and how we give consent, and how we respect and others' ability to consent.
I was gonna say that you are conscious of that. Now you have it in your mind to be better, to
Right.
try to do better. But most people are don't do they don't think like that. They're just in their everyday life. You know, just
Yeah.
living life without thinking about these things, so they're not trying to be
Right.
better
I
or
think
change their behavior.
I think a lot of parents always want to, because you're not like trying to like outdo your parent, because if you had a good relationship with them, you appreciate what they did with, we're all gonna fuck each other up at some point as parent as parent to child relationship. Sometimes always gonna go right. We're human. You know what I
Right.
mean? But you always appreciate those efforts regardless, unless it was a very unhealthy relationship with the parent, and then that's a whole nother level. But I'm basing this on a good relationship, like what I
Yeah.
feel I've had with my parent. um if you're on a relatively healthy relationship, there's still, my mother had a good relationship with her mother, and still there were things that she wanted to, felt differently about, thought differently about, that she wanted to teach me differently, right?
Right.
And there's certainly things that, not out of disrespect to my teachings or how I was raised, because I appreciate it. It's the reason I am the woman I am, right? But that I wanted better because I now have a different understanding of what is meaningful to me and what I would like to be meaningful to my child, and what I have seen is meaningful to those around me and necessary in the world that I have grown up in the world that they are continuing to live in, and how
Right.
this world has evolved. So I don't, and who knows? I think what happens, especially in like Hispanic households, we're very traditional people. Our
Yeah.
cultural traditions are something that we latch onto for dear life, and we want to pass them along. And sometimes, even though we say, I'm not going to teach that to my kid, I'm going to be different, when it comes down to it, we all have heard the story, I've become my mother, right? And we end up passing that along. Um, and no es por malicia, it's not for malice or intention, and it's because it does have its benefits, but we also do remember the things that we want to do kind of differently. So I think for those who have the intention of wanting to have children, it's always the kind of uh, checking in with yourself and
Right.
reminding, am I teaching what I said, what I sought out to teach and to pass on to my child, to my niece, to my nephew, whatever the case may be. Because there's a lot of people that don't want to have kids, but the way that they impart their wisdom and keep it going in the world is through the children that they teach. If you're a teacher, their nieces or nephews, their
Right.
brothers and sisters. Um, but yeah,
My sister, she raised my nieces beautifully, different from us, obviously, and better communicators, better relationship, better, like, my niece talks to my sister and they talk and they communicate. Y eso es lo más bello del mundo, because we didn't have that.
yeah.
You know, my sister obviously gives them everything that she can, and it, you know, obviously they have to earn the extraness that they want, you know, by being good at school, doing what they need. But
But there's always that like deviation, right? There's the roads that one can take. We have our experience,
yeah,
and the choice comes where we either let that experience, um, and sometimes it's not like you're making this conscious effort to be a difficult or a poor communicator, right? It doesn't mean, it's not because you're a bad person, as
yeah,
we just all react differently. And the road you choose is to continue emulating that, to not be a good communicator. For example, in abusive situations, sometimes the abused becomes the abuser. It's all
right,
they've known. But there's also the ones that choose to see it as being a survivor, and live in that mentality. And we have those deviations, especially like when it comes to communicating and partnerships, and in families, and when we have kids. Do I want to, the same things that affected me, am I doing it intentionally, right? It's the revisiting, checking in with yourself. Am I doing the same thing that caused me so much harm to this
right,
new human being? Or or you automatically, without even having to check in with yourself, are you already doing it?
right. And that's the thing, you have to pay attention to those patterns.
Yeah.
But me still living through this, as me and my sister grew up and seeing my nieces, I know for a fact that I've been there where my sisters, taught them about consent, permission,
Yeah.
about things like that, and the talks and what's right, what's wrong, and etc. But that's because she decided to be that person, and have that consciousness to sit there and be different and want to be like, I can be like my parents,
Right.
and but that's also a lesson there. She was taught that how we were raised was wrong
Right.
or not that effective, so
Right.
now she's gonna change it. But you see, that's because you wanted to do that,
Yeah.
because you wanted to be a better person.
Right. And I think it also happens like, obviously when it starts at that stage, parent child is massively important, but I think we do it with each other, in friendships, in romantic partnerships, where we kind of help reteach ourselves things that maybe we didn't know about what consent should look like, what it should sound like, because consent has an entire language. Look
Right.
at our background, right? And it's not necessarily consent of just the question, but if someone's response to an action or to something said in a matter of fact way versus a permission question, right? That tone of a permission, that language of a permission of a question, the response should tell you where you need to be, where you need to check yourself, right? If the response physically and verbally is one of no, to learn how to read the room, you know? Hay gente que son un poquito like, things go over their head, they don't mean to, keep pushing, pero si ya después de la tercera es, no, I don't think so. Hey, no, I really don't like it. Thanks, but no thanks.
Right.
No, like, yeah, get it. It doesn't matter that your intention was not to get sacarle de quicio. The
Right.
fact is, the no was already said.
And apparently it wasn't enough. And
We've
this
talked about that before. That is a pet peeve of yours.
it
It's a
brings
pet
me
peeve of mine. Like, if I gotta say it too many times,
right. I'm like, I said no, literally no. And I was brings me back to how I was gonna what we spoke about before. People have hard time saying no.
oh yeah, I've gotten better about it. Thank goodness, because it's gotten me to a whole lot of heartache and trouble. But I'm definitely one of those people that has difficulty saying no.
See, and I don't. I really don't.
That's good.
But
But it goes into the boundary setting,
right,
right? And really, and the checking in with yourself and understanding what's cool for you and what's not. Now, if you're setting a boundary out of spite, I believe in setting boundaries and saying no as a measure of true protection and true uh comfortability and engage, like, and healthy engagement with another person. But if you're saying setting a boundary or saying that no out of spite or out of ¿cómo le explico?
to get back at them in a way.
Right, to
Like
get back at them, it's not necessarily a real boundary.
right. Like it wasn't needed, but you did
Right.
it anyway.
Then it's something that you need to assess about yourself, right? Like, really talk to yourself, like, why am I feeling this way? But certain boundaries and certain no's, for the most part, you're always thinking of like, I know that this is not going to be good for me, right?
Right.
And there's always the possibility, hablando se entiende la gente,
Which
right? Talking, people understand each other. So if there's the possibility of a conversation, wonderful. But if it's a hard no, then that needs to be respected, right? Whether it's sexually, whether it's emotionally, you're coming into my bubble of sadness, there's a hard no for certain things,
right.
right? We all know what our triggers are. There's hard no's to some of those. So it applies to all the things.
I feel like, oh, Vanessa, you want to go out tonight? No. Just a simple no. Okay. I mean, I feel like certain situations should be elaborated a little bit more depending on what it is. Just depending on what it is, obviously. Like, oh, Vanessa, why can't you hang out tonight? It would be nice to let me know we had this plan. Are you still coming?
Yeah.
And explain the reasons why no. But certain situations like, oh, hey, I like you. Would you like to go out with me? No, I'm sorry. Not interested. Done. Now, if the person keeps pursuing that and they're like, why aren't you interested? There's literally no.
I mean, there's also the approach, right? Because there have been beautiful love stories that started off like, yo no quería nada que ver. I didn't want anything to do with this person. And they kept pursuing, look at us together 50 years. But I guess it's, again, the language, the approach. If it's like douchey and arrogant, it's not, it's going to have that, it's going to leave that sour taste, that face that you're making that.
Right. But it put you off, yeah.
Absolutely. But if it's a way of like, no, I'm really interested, and there's ways.
Right. But communication, talking, understanding, but.
And not just understanding other people, understanding yourself first so that you can understand other people.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I think that there's a lot of us make assumptions. And I say us, the general us, because in any given moment, regardless of whether it's our intention or our typical personality, we may have done something. Right? So a lot of us tend to place or impose what our preferred language of consent or boundaries or ways of saying no on other people, assuming that that's how they're going to respond as well. Right? Because now we understand ourselves and we know what we want and what we would like. We make the assumption that it's going to be the same for the other person, especially because if they're my friend, if they're my lover, we're similar, right? So they're going to have the same, and it's not the case. Their experience is different.
I feel like people should not base their opinions or their statements or whatever because, oh, you're my friend. Like, no, yes, I get it, we're friends, but still, we should still have that talk. Like you just said, it's not the case. But people always goes based on, pero tú eres mi hermano, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it actually does.
It matters to me.
Yeah, exactly. It matters to me just because you're a sibling, you are a friend. It matters to me that you first ask me because we're maybe the same, but we're not going to react the same way. Like,
I've come to realize I throw myself under the bus a lot on our show. But I mean, it's a fact. If I don't start learning and recognizing things about myself in these conversations, am I really growing? Am I really being a person?
I mean, it takes they're not little, but these conversations to get us thinking to be better too.
Being my best self. And the thing is, I recognize in myself a lot. And as of late, I've tried to be even more cognizant of it, where I know how I react and certain things that I believe, right? And that I'm okay with, that when I see someone else having a very opposite reaction, sometimes me cuesta entenderlos.
Right.
And it's not my place. It's not my place to judge it. It's not my place to think that my way is better. Right. But I definitely see where sometimes my way might be healthier. But if it's that person's truth and what their capacity is to that moment, there's not much else that you can show them that is not just going to cause more pain in them. Right. Or exacerbate their already existing feeling or trauma about a particular thing. And that's something I've had to learn. Either that as when you're in someone's life, whatever kind of relationship dynamic you may have, you kind of, and if it's a largo plazo, like you have a history with this person, you have emotional and communication agreements, you are kind of like, it is nice, or it kind of is your responsibility to help them be their best selves when they're not acting their best self.
Right.
Right. I appreciate it of my friends and family when they call me out on like, you're doing it again, where you don't know, where you're not saying no, and you're filling your cup. You're like, I'm sorry, you're emptying out your cup. You're giving from your cup and you're on empty.
Right.
You know, and it's gonna bite you in the ass. Or I'm consenting to things that go against my core beliefs. Right. I appreciate where, if I'm stuck in a bubble of not seeing it and not putting those boundaries for myself and standing up for the certain types of consent that I would prefer to give, if somebody really knows me and says, hey, you're not, have you recognized that this is what you're doing? I appreciate it, because sometimes I'm like, no, I didn't. And it's not cool. And I've lost myself in this process, or I've allowed things that have taught someone to treat me in a way that does not make me feel good.
And that's the thing that people don't realize, that they don't realize that they're doing that. They're doing it, pero they're not checking with themselves. They're not, wait, do I agree with this? Do I like this? Is it something that I want to do? Am I doing it for what reason? And that's where the problem lies.
We're
And,
never taught to do that, really.
well, yeah, freaking learn that somewhere.
We're taught, deal with your shit. Right? Which absolutely, there's a lot of things that we absolutely, there are things that we can only go through ourselves, feel it ourselves, finagle it through ourselves. But if you have that kind of like assist or support from another person, not necessarily in the form of advice, just apoyo, un abrazo, whatever the case may be, that is always nice. The reminders, right? Because we're not taught to check in with ourselves. And sometimes we don't check in with ourselves until we're so deep in things, right? Deep in consenting to things that harm us. So deep in setting unhealthy boundaries, or not setting boundaries at all. We're so deep. And then when we finally realize it, we could have saved ourselves so much heartache, so much unnecessary traumas. But we don't know to do that unless we start looking at ourselves for real.
And I also think that this goes back to people not putting themselves first. They like to, some people are people pleasers. Some people like to, and some people like to put other people's first. Some people think that what they want or what they need doesn't matter, and that's another problem. So it goes deep. It gets deeper. I am a person that put myself first all the time. It might sound selfish, or it might sound self-centered, or it might sound like whatever, but that's not how I'm trying to say it.
Yeah.
It's just that I matter. So if Chubby does not like what's happening, Chubby's not gonna go anywhere. Chubby's not doing anything. If Chubby doesn't feel good, she's not happy, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And because I'm good at saying no.
Yeah. I am the opposite. I have very big issues with all of those things. Like, not issues like bad Chubby. No, I absolutely understand the benefit, and I slowly learned the benefit of making certain things about myself and making sure that I put me first for a lot of things. But for me, it really is about finding a balance of when that's necessary versus when it's not. And it can be healing to put yourself first, right?
I absolutely
And you can't really give your best to other people if, in giving your so much of yourself and not putting yourself first, you're giving from my friend Andrea tells me tells me this all the time, and you're pouring out from an empty cup.
Yeah.
You're not going to, like, for example, in a family dynamic, your family needs your help. If you're like cayéndote a pedazos, how can you help your family if you are in bad health, or you're not, placing certain focuses on right? But if you kind of reframe it and say, okay, if I focus on this, I'll be able to help my family like this. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Seeing it from the bigger picture, the bird's eye view of situations.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm gonna read 15 ways of saying no. If you're a person like Vanessa and you don't know how to say no,
This is for you.
I gathered some ways of saying no, and I hope that.
When it comes to work stuff, I can certainly say no.
Oh yeah, trust me. I mean, I can even for work stuff.
When it
But
comes to work stuff, I'm a different human being. I'm like, nope. When it comes to putting my face on things, nope.
and that's the thing. Do you think you cannot? Do you think you could apply that to your daily life, to your everyday?
It's definitely more recently. It's definitely a practice I'm trying to apply because it's different for me. Like work is work, and it's definitely my face. It's definitely my reputation. It's all those things. But in my interpersonal relationships, I'm very cognizant of the other person's feelings and things, and unfortunately, that that informs how or why I say yes or no. And I'm not always honest with myself. I'm like, I really don't want to, or I really shouldn't, which is the difference. Sometimes,
Right.
not that I don't necessarily want to, sometimes you have to do things you don't want to because it does benefit somebody that you care about in a way that's beneficial to both of you in the end.
Right.
But sometimes it's like you shouldn't, for yourself and for that person.
Right.
So it's always like that balance for me. But I'm trying to apply more of the saying no for my own sanity.
Don't get me wrong. I could say yes. It's not like I
I
always.
know you say yes. We wouldn't be here if you didn't say yes.
Right. But I know it's hard for some people. So hopefully this helps you.
I'm ready.
Help you, you know, find other ways to say no that you could apply to your daily life and practice little by little. And I know it may seem hard at first, and you may feel like ouch, like you feel that in your heart, but think about it in the way that, oh, okay, I said no, my God. And then your end result, and then you're gonna realize it was worth it.
But it's
Going
taking
through
back
that
their
little.
own power. That's what I've heard people refer to it as. They're taking back their own power and being able to consent to things or not. Say yes. No.
Right. And it's gonna feel better knowing that you're able to actually now say no. And
Teach me the ways, Judy.
and
Teach me the
remember,
ways.
no is a full sentence. But
Ooh,
I know it's hard for some people to say that word, because that word to some people carries so much power, and then at the same time it doesn't carry any at all.
ooh. Preach. Damn. Go ahead, Shubi.
So 15 ways to say no. No. No, I'm not able to do that. I'm unavailable. I can't make it. No, not at this time. Thank you for the offer, but no. Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to attend or do this. That doesn't work for me. Thanks, but this isn't going to work. I'd rather not, thanks. I'm already busy, but thanks. This isn't doable for me right now. It isn't a good fit for me. I'm not really into insert activity here, but thanks for asking. Little things here and there that I thought were,
You know what
helpful.
it makes me think of? There's no ambivalent language there, right? Which, by the way, is a pet peeve of mine. Like, if it's gonna be no, just let it be no. If it's gonna be yes, let it be yes. But I'm also guilty of the ambivalent language because what are we afraid of? Of being the bad guy, or of coming off as cortante, right? Like very short.
Right.
And that's not what you're doing. You're being honest. You're being genuine. Yes, no. But there's, it's sometimes it absolutely, if no is all you can get out, no is all you can get out. But like you said, thank you for the offer, right? It's appreciated. I get where you're coming from, but no, not for me, right? It's still a definitive no.
Yeah, there were indicative words there of no, of
It's
rejection.
not
Of,
you being a dick and saying, hell no. Is that right? And there's also, again, the ambivalence of like, well, let's see. Or I don't know, maybe,
maybe,
maybe.
maybe get to me. When you want to say no, don't say maybe, please.
But when I say this, I think of all the times I've said maybe, and I'm like, oh, Vanessa, you've been the maybe person. And you understand why you say maybe. To you, it really does mean maybe, but it's not definitive, and it leaves that other person hanging. So you take
Right.
their ability away of making a real decision. And I've learned this from my friends who really need those definitives, right? The people in my life that really need those definitives to map out their life. Sometimes I'm like, listen, the best I can give you right now is a maybe. Is that something that you can work with, or do you need a definitive? Right? That's a different animal. But if tú le das el maybe and it's just hanging there, that's annoying.
To me, when you say maybe, you could say maybe. Don't get me wrong. Hold on, guys. You could say maybe, but be like, yeah, maybe. I'm not too sure right now. Maybe we could do it because maybe my plans will not fall into. Give a bit a descriptive answer.
Right. Or what would make it a definitive? Maybe if we're gonna be inside, if we're gonna be 6 feet apart, if we're gonna be where por usar los ejemplos de ahora, right? Like the things that are happening right now in conversation, because this whole mask and social distancing thing has become like people are not recognizing it as a simple like a right as a human being. They're like, it's my right to not wear it. You're right, but it's my place to say I don't want to be around you. Right? So
Right.
it's yes, we can hang out maybe if this is what's in place. If everybody should be comfortable. If there's a request being made, or especially for like a hangout situation, it's not like you're trying to be the dick. I want to see you. I just have parameters.
Right. So, guys, if you're going to use the word maybe, just make sure you elaborate. If you want to, but if you want to say no and you say maybe, you got yourself into that. Like, I
And
feel
something that I read about consent, it's reversible. It's reversible. So if you said no, and that was how you felt at that moment about a particular thing, that is very much what you said. No. There was no maybe, if tal. You want to just say no. No, and that's fine. No, I don't think so. Thank you for the invite, though. And as it gets closer to, you're like, you know what? I do want to. Hey,
right.
listen, I changed my mind. Is that offer still available? Oh, no. Okay, I understand. I know I said no before. Thank you so much.
There you go.
It was your own doing that you could not be there because you actively said no. So you can't be mad. You
Right.
can't boo-hoo yourself.
But if
But
there are
it's
still,
reversible.
and that is important to hear. Remember, guys, it is reversible. At any point in your day, you're like, oh, never mind, I changed my mind. Like if you're going on a date and you just feel like you don't want to be in the date anymore, you could say, I'm sorry, I want to end this date now. I don't feel comfortable anymore. I want to go home, or can you take me home, depending on the situation. I don't know what's going on. Just
Right.
say you can, but you have to verbalize that. And
Absolutely.
some people do have trouble verbalizing their uncomfortableness, like verbalizing that, or that they changed their mind. They don't want to do it anymore.
Now that you say that, it makes me think of like also the outsider perspective of not judging someone for changing their stance,
Right.
right? Because as a society, we have a tendency to point the finger of like, why did you put yourself in that situation or stay in that situation if you weren't happy? You don't know what that was going on through that person's head.
Exactly.
Being paralyzed in a situation is a very real thing, especially when we're talking about dates or sexual encounters, or even with in a work environment that it has nothing to do with sex or sexual harassment. It's just you're hearing racist commentary in the workplace. You're right to walk out and not be a part of that conversation, but there's other things that come into play for you because you're like, am I going to get fired? Am I going to? Those are valid things, you know. And yes, you can walk out or whatever, or you can say something there, but to judge somebody for having thoughts is not fair because you don't understand what they're going through or why that is their thought process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that people do not take into consideration, that you're judging them based on just one scenario that they shared, and now you think you know everything.
How many times have you heard um, of a sexual harassment situation and that the person stays working there and the comment from those around you is, they could have just quit. They could have just done. Da, 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 da. Have you not heard this?
Yeah, plenty of
And
time.
then it's a valid thought. You could have just left.
But we don't know why they didn't.
To invalidate someone's discomfort when it comes to a sexual harassment situation, sexual assault, when it comes to a rape, to invalidate that, like for the longest time when we heard, oh, you shouldn't have dressed like that, you were asking for it.
That gets on.
Massively invalidating and incorrect. Talk about the differences of that too.
I could go into it right now.